So, what about behavior and attitude modification? It's critical to really make some changes in your behavior because that's what's really going to help you along with your journey in weight loss to keep it off. You have to set goals that are very specific, realistic, forgiving. You can set a goal, but if life gets in the way, you can't just, you know, give up. You have to keep on. You have to realize that, maybe I made a mistake, but slipping up doesn't make you give up. So it's important to have realistic goals that are very specific and try to be consistent and put them on your calendar, just like a meeting with your boss, and you're more likely to do it. They say that people who make New Year's resolutions are so much better off, even if they cancel or don't follow through with them. If you have a goal, at least you're starting out with having a goal. You're going to be more likely to try to achieve it as opposed to if you don't have any goals at all. So, key thing is, having the right attitude and really sticking with. Some of the elements of a behavioral and attitude modification program are self-monitoring. A lot of people really enjoy keeping a log of all their food and activity choices. So you can do it on a Fitbit, you can do it on an app like MyFitnessPal. There's so many of them now, Lose It app. But when you monitor, it just kind of keeps you in check. It really just kind of holds you accountable by keeping a log. And then, of course, you want to look at the stimulus or cue control. And by that, I mean, let's say that you've always stopped at the donut shop on the way to work in the morning. And that stimulus is always there. That cue is always there for you to stop and get that donut. But if you're really concerned about, being more successful, then maybe you go a different route to change that cue so that you're not being invited in. And there's no reminder that that's what you used to do. So it's really important to think about these things. How about reinforcement and self-reward? A lot of times we badmouth ourselves and we tell ourselves how negative we are and how overweight we are and how we can't keep up with a healthy eating program. But when we are successful, we need to reward ourselves and reinforce good behavior, because like anyone, we all need to feel the success and move on. So that might be taking a trip, or if you lose a certain amount of weight, treat yourself to a new type of perfume, or maybe a golf club or a tennis racket or something. So somehow you want to reward yourself. But again, these are all really important to think about, because it's not just what you're eating. It's many times the behaviors that we get into, and it's just so easy to slip into negative behaviors, and it's very, very hard to get out of those. And you have to really keep at it, and you have to, give yourself pep talks, or you have to have a buddy to go through it with you. Self-monitoring, to kind of go through these steps in a little greater detail, it's just keeping a record of what you ate and maybe how you've exercised. But a lot of people include their feelings and the amount of food they ate and how they felt and how hungry they were. And that kind of helps to give you some clues about these behaviors you have. And then it also, gives you a little bit of a cue if you're overeating. So, like I mentioned before, it's really critical to talk about hunger and fullness and hunger versus appetite. So many times you may have food written down in your journal that you truly weren't hungry for, but maybe it was just the right time, or maybe you felt like you needed the snack, or maybe it was just your appetite taking over, but it wasn't a real need. And that's what we recommend to clients, is to really kind of figure out that feeling of when you really need the food. So another one of those elements is stimulus or cue control. And there's a lot of things you can do. Number one, I always recommend planning meals because if you kind of sketch it out, you don't have to do it very rigid, but just sketch it out so that when you go to the store, you're going to know what you're going to get. You're not going to overshop. And then you have a plan. You have a plan of what you're going to eat, so it gets you a little excited looking forward to something different or new. And you don't have to be doing the 6 o'clock scramble like everyone else. So, making a plan is very, very critical. And then also keep food out of sight. People realize, yes, nuts are very healthy. And then they go out and buy a, gallon jug of nuts and leave it on the counter. And then before you know it, half of it's gone. So if it's something that's very calorically dense and it's something that you should have a moderate amount of, keep it out of sight, out of mind. And then obviously have more lower calorie snacks on hand. Drink water. Serve food at the table and not family style. Excuse me. Don't serve food at the table. Just plate it up on the counter. Because if you serve everything family style and there's leftovers, people are going to be so consumed into eating their plate, knowing they can have more, as opposed to realizing this is what I get, this is what I need. Another one is leaving the table after eating. Because if you linger and there's leftovers, many times people will grab extra bites, which turns into extra calories, which turns into extra weight. And so therefore, when you're eating out, you should kind of psych yourself up for what you're going to have, and instead of waiting till you get there and having the dish you always got, or maybe one that's very calorically dense, kind of jump out at you. So, you have to decide what are the real concerns that you have and how can I change those, even in a small way, but yet it's going to make a big impact, especially if you stick with it over time. So what about modifying eating behaviors? So many times people are into eating in front of the TV, or they use their little mouse pad as a doily for their sandwich at lunch. So they don't really take the time to just go and eat and enjoy. So it's really important to set rules for yourself and only eat at the kitchen table. Don't eat while the TV's on. Eat as a singular activity so that you can really enjoy the pleasure of eating. So every time I see a client for weight loss, that's what they say. I just don't get to eat what I want. I just don't get to enjoy it. But yet when you talk to them about how they're eating and how much they're eating, they're not really honoring it. And they're not honoring their hunger. They're just eating it because it's there. So it's important to be a food snob. And, eat regular meals, eat slowly, savor every bite, so that you can really enjoy the pleasure of eating. And then, of course, even if you grew up in an environment where you were supposed to clean your plate, you don't have to. You don't have to clean your plate. And also, you can use a smaller plate so you don't put as much on it, so then you can clean your plate. So again, there's a lot of different ways to modify our behavior. And then when it comes to rewards, it's just about, rewarding those positive steps. Try not to use food for that. Like when I get to a certain weight, I'm going to have this big juicy pizza with pepperoni and sausage. Pick something that's desirable to you, but also that fits into your program, your healthy journey. A lot of people are involved in emotional eating. It's not just stress. It could be any emotion, because even life as a party is an emotion. Some people eat more when things are going good. Some people eat more when they're really stressed out. Some people don't eat when they're stressed out. But to relieve stress, it's important to do exercise, or maybe even relaxation or some yoga. Switch to different activities to get your mind off of the food. And if you want a cookie or a sweet or an ice cream or a candy bar, take 5 minutes, take 5 before you do it. Sometimes you're going to go on to something else and you'll even forget about that food. Or you can take a big glass of water, a big swig of water out of a bottle, and that might do it for you. That might be enough to get you sidetracked where you don't have to eat it. But no matter what, it's important to be a friend to yourself. Positive self-talk goes a long way for good self-control. So, we spend so much time bashing what we're doing and criticizing, and it's better to really think about being more positive. And that brings us to our attitude modification. You know, we make such unrealistic statements. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to lose 50 pounds, or I want to lose 50 pounds, or I'm going to run that half marathon in December, when you've never run ever in your life. So when you set unrealistic goals, you're not going to be able to achieve them. So unrealistic statements like, I will always control my desire for chocolate, I will exercise every day. When they're stated like this, it's hard to accomplish them. So kind of avoid the sweeping terms like always and never and every, because if you do overeat, then you just create more of that disrespect for yourself. So it's important to just stay calm and realize that you don't have to seek perfection. Just try to make some progress every day. So much more positive. And then, of course, I can't mention any of this without the importance of speaking about support. And that's why a lot of times weight loss challenges work at the work site, because people at the work site can support one another. So that means that if you're working with somebody in your family, you have to ask for the support, because many times if it's a spouse or a partner, many times even if you ask for the support, many times it's taken as criticism. So communication is really key there, but it's important to ask for support. And that's why some of the online programs work really well. Whether it's an internet or an iPhone or a phone technology weight loss application, sometimes people do better just getting support from the program. So most of them, like MyFitnessPal, Super Tracker, Smart People, Spark People, Weight Loss, Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, a lot of them have an online application, and they have coaches that work with you virtually, and some people do extremely well with that. Whatever and however you can get that support, it'll really help you long term. Those mobile exercises and weight reduction apps are very common and very popular. You just have to experiment with them, because there's a little bit of a learning curve when you're starting them. How about when you finally lose it? You finally lose the weight, and then what happens about maintenance? Many times people fall back and they end up gaining more weight back than they even had to begin with. So it's critical to continue to follow healthy eating. You can't have the mindset where I'm going to diet, and then when I get to my weight, I'm going to go back to my old way. That's a sure thing that you're going to gain it back. But if you keep your eating patterns consistent, that's important, whether it's a weekday or a weekend. Just like a diabetic, they have to be very consistent in their eating to control blood sugar. That's a really good message. It translates to a person who doesn't have diabetes. I mentioned this before. Eat breakfast every day. Keep monitoring your activity and your intake. Make sure that you move your body up to 60 minutes or more a day. Don't be the couch potato. Don't get into weighing yourself so that you get caught up in this, oh my gosh, I'm not changing, and then you fixate and obsess with that. But always get the support of your family, your friends, your coworkers, anyone you feel that's really rooting for you and that cares about your best interest. So that's a little bit about, just weight loss in general, but there's a lot of myths out there. Um, there's a lot of fad diets, and we're going to talk about one of them in just a little bit, but there's so many fad diets, and what people should realize is if any of them worked, no one would have a problem. But because they're very because diets aren't aren't established or set up or developed for long term, people just jump from one to the next. And some of them absolutely make no sense at all, like the grapefruit diet or the cabbage soup diet, when they tell you you can burn an X number of grams of fat and lose weight. I mean, yeah, anyone who is on a 500 calories a day is going to lose a lot of weight, whether they're on the grapefruit diet or whether they're eating real food. But it's unrealistic to expect to, number one, keep that off. And then number two, you're not really changing your behavior. You're just changing your temporary diet. Um, Generally, high protein diets work good for losing weight, but something like the Atkins diet or the new focus on the ketogenic diet, can really be detrimental because you're getting a lot more saturated fat in your diet. And what people don't tell you is that you may have kidney stones as related to the high protein diet because your kidneys have to excrete the end products of protein metabolism. So, they're going to talk about the benefits, but you're not going to hear what might happen to your body if you eat those certain diets for a length of time. And then, of course, there's many products. And like we talked about earlier in the book, anything that's natural or herbal doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. There's a lot of products out there, like Fen-Phen was a product years ago that sent a lot of people into, cardiac issues, heart issues, because of, the nature of the ingredient. So again, there's no cure, there's no fix. It's just eating less, moving more. And, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. It is. Some other things to think about, low fat and fat free means no calories. Well, that's not true. When the company first put out the very first weight loss cookie or low calorie cookie, the Snackwells, if anybody remembers Snackwells, well, people got so caught up in the fact that they had so little fat that they'd eat a whole sleeve of cookies. That didn't mean that they were calorie free. It just means that, they may be a little bit less in calories, but they're still going to have a whole lot of sugar in them. So another one is fast foods are always unhealthy. Well, think about it. If you go to a fast food restaurant and you choose things that are healthier, like a grilled chicken sandwich with lettuce and tomato, if you have a salad and put, all the vegetables you can in it, limit the dressing. If you have a fruit cup instead of the French fries, you can choose it. You can choose healthier choices, and they're really going to benefit you by not exceeding your calories. But again, you have to psych yourself up. You can't just drive through the drive-through and say, "Hey, I want the, whatever sandwich." And 9 times out of 10, if you haven't planned ahead in your mind, you're going to, give into your old ways. So we already talked about this, but skipping meals is never a good idea, ever, because you make up for those calories that you didn't take in at that meal. Another myth that I'd like to squelch is that you shouldn't eat anything after 6, 7, 8. You'll hear different things. The reality is, it's how many calories you consume in a day that matters. Actually, it's how many calories you consume in a week, because you can come under maybe 200 calories one day and go over 200 calories in a couple of days, but it's your average over the week that's going to either help you maintain, lose, or gain. So it's not about necessarily when you're eating, it's about your total calorie intake. Another myth is that lifting weights isn't good because it'll make you bulk up. The reality is, like I mentioned before, when you're doing strength training, you're actually building a little bit of muscle, and women shouldn't worry that it's going to be excessive, but it causes you to, build a little muscle, burn calories more efficiently, and help you burn the body fat for fuel. So, doing some sort of strength is a very important component of a weight loss program. And then, of course, we have things like nuts. A lot of people think nuts are fattening and they shouldn't be eaten. The reality is, nuts are high in protein, they're high in fiber. Yes, they do have fat, and they're usually polyunsaturated, so they're a good fat. And so, again, you just don't want to have them on the counter and eat them all day, because a cup of nuts is 800 calories. So, but they're very beneficial in helping with weight loss because they give you that really good satiety value. They keep you full longer. And then last but not least is our dairy products, which take a beating from all sides. But dairy products have 9 essential nutrients. They naturally contain protein, and therefore are very beneficial for weight maintenance programs and weight loss programs because they keep you full longer. So, again, another myth. So, again, think about some of these weight loss myths and fad diets, and participate. I'd like to see everybody participate in the discussion board called Weight Loss Myths. But today, I want to kick it off with talking about the ketogenic diet, because it's all the rage. Everyone's talking about it. And it sort of got dug up, not from the, popular press like most diets do, but really it was kind of came about from the medical community. So when you actually look at some of the highly Googled diets for the last year, according to Time Magazine, the ketogenic diet was one of the top Googled diets. Adopting the keto involves drastically reducing the carb intake to 15 to 30 grams a day. Okay, so for your reference, that's about one small banana. Now think about everything we talked about all semester, how your diet should be 45 to 65% of your calories coming from carbs. And here you have a diet that's promoting 15 to 30 grams, which would be the equivalent of one small banana. The remainder of the keto diet consists of mostly meats, fish, eggs, cheese, butter, oils, creams, green leafy vegetables, nuts, breads, pasta, rice, flour, beans, potatoes, fruits. Anything that's high carb is completely eliminated. So think about that. It goes against everything we talked about all semester. Why would anyone voluntarily subject themselves to this torture when we know that those are the food groups that really provide the best energy source? Unlike Whole30, which is also very popular, and then the other one, the Weight Watchers, the ketogenic diet was not initiated by a commercial company or the social media influencers. It gained attention from the medical community. So there's a body of research that suggests that the keto diet can reduce seizures in children with epilepsy, and that over half the children who go on the diet have seen at least a 50% reduction in seizures. The mechanism isn't really understandable. It's not entirely clear. But the most supported theory is related to the process known as ketosis, and that's where the name came from, keto. Normally, when we ingest carbohydrates of any kind, our body breaks it down into glucose. When the glucose levels rise, our pancreas secretes the hormone insulin. Insulin then allows our cells to take in glucose and store it for energy for use later. Now remember, we talked about this. This is a normal and necessary metabolic process, and glucose is our body's preferred source of fuel. Well, ketosis is a process that occurs when there's not enough glucose in the blood due to the lack of carbohydrate intake. So fat stores are broken down into ketones, which are used as an alternative source of energy. Under normal circumstances, glucose is the brain's primary source of energy. So therefore, ketosis naturally alters the energy metabolism in the brain. This is thought to suppress the rapid firing of nerve cells that occurs during seizures. So medical professionals and parents of children with epilepsy, their goal is to reduce the obstacles that are associated with seizures. And they're willing to take on the risks of such a restrictive diet to do so in the best interest of their child's physical and mental safety. But are there benefits of adopting the keto diet for people without epilepsy? And if so, what are the risks? Well, fitness and wellness professionals that support the keto diet claim that the process of ketosis promotes weight loss by breaking down body fat instead of carbs for energy. They also claim that improved focus and sports performance and lower cholesterol and triglyceride levels. Yet, when you look at it, these outcomes have only been demonstrated in short-term studies, which are really crucial to, to something that's sustainable. The longest study that's ever been performed on the keto diet is a population without epilepsy is only 24 weeks, and that was conducted on a sample size of only 66 individuals. And even if there were more long-term studies conducted, these studies would likely exhibit the serious risks associated with being on such a drastic restriction of carbohydrate, such as impaired brain function. The brain's primary fuel source is glucose, and your brain needs a minimum of 140 grams per day to meet this need. That's equivalent to three and a quarter cups of cooked pasta just for your brain. When carbohydrate intake is restricted, the body can break down fat and protein for energy, but this isn't the preferred method of energy metabolism, and it's not enough to provide the 140 grams of carbs that the brain requires for optimal functioning. Decreased glucose to the brain can be useful for preventing seizures, but for individuals without epilepsy or with epilepsy, it can lead to poor attention and also impaired memory. So impaired brain function is one problem. What about muscle atrophy? Since carbohydrate intake is restricted for a long period on the keto diet, the body resorts to using protein as an alternative source of energy during exercise. Carbohydrates are normally what powers that muscle contraction, but if the individual has consumed more than enough protein, such as the keto diet, protein stimulates this process when carbohydrates aren't available. This is commonly an overlooked process. Most people assume that fat will be the next in line for breakdown when there's no carbs, but that is only when there's not enough protein, which there usually is because muscles can be broken down to get the protein energy. So over time, this makes it extremely difficult to build and maintain muscle mass. So we talked about impaired brain function, muscle atrophy. What about metabolic acidosis? When the body does actually reach ketosis and metabolize fat, that's when the body has been meticulously manipulated through a rigid control of the diet. Carbohydrates are required for the breakdown of ketones. When carbohydrate intake is restricted, there can be a dangerous buildup of those ketones unable to be broken down, and this leads to metabolic acidosis, which causes fatigue, confusion, and headaches. Similarly, metabolites of carbohydrates are also responsible for excreting toxins in the liver. Well, without this excretion, there's a high likelihood of acidosis. To compensate for that problem, the body may naturally draw calcium from bones as a buffer, which then leads to long-term bone fragility. If that isn't bad enough, even short-term studies have shown that a buildup of ketones also leads to a buildup of acetone, which induces desirable side effects like odorous sweat and also bad breath. What about constipation and digestive disorders? We all know how important fiber is. Fiber is provided solely by carbohydrate-rich fruits, vegetables, and grains. It's crucial for laxation. So that's why constipation is shown to be one of the major common side effects of the keto diet. People aren't getting enough fiber and having digestive issues as a result of it. The research upholds that over 60% of individuals who follow the keto diet will experience constipation, and this effect will persist long term. The long-term effects of constipation, besides the fact that it causes discomfort in your tummy, are fatigue, painful hemorrhoids, and compromised immunity. So, another drastic restriction of the carbohydrate intake is electrolyte imbalances. Restricting the diet in such an extreme way puts keto dieters at risk for various deficiencies. Some of the most common are sodium, potassium, and vitamin D. Sodium, as we know, controls blood pressure, and it also regulates the function of muscles and nerves and its ability to retain water, and that's essential in keeping a balance of electrolytes. Most keto dieters will recommend a salt tablet as a supplement to the diet, but supplements will never provide the sustenance and additional nutrients that real food gives. It's also critical to remember that the keto is overall extremely rigid, and it is not sustainable in an adult population. While it may be possible to get the missing fiber, sodium, potassium, and vitamin D from allowed foods on the keto, it's not without tasking calculations and persistent tracking of your intake. Research focusing on, there's a program called Health at Every Size, and anti-diet approaches has really taught us that restrictions and calculations of food intake leads to emotional distress, food preoccupation, weight cycling, and long-term binge eating. So in conclusion, it's also important to note that this diet was never intended for adults. It has been extremely or extensively researched and supported for children and epilepsy, but it doesn't carry over to the adult population whether they have seizures or not. Epilepsy patients on the keto diet are always under close supervision of dietitians to make sure that their bodies are not breaking down too much muscle protein into carbohydrate. On the other hand, individuals who take this diet on themselves are running the risk of not actually reaching ketosis and therefore breaking down muscle protein instead. So, a lot to think about here. Well, most health professionals aren't going to put their blessing on a lot of these temporary diets. The keto is definitely one of them that wouldn't be recommended. It's important to try to look beyond the shiny selling points of weight loss, fat burning, increased athletic performance, but really consider the risks that are associated with a diet such as the ketogenic diet. And is the added physical and mental stress really worth it? Just some food for thought. Thank you, and that is the conclusion of our weight loss chapter.